So last video I received these comments and it immediately got me thinking I should definitely do that and expand and do more shows. So today I'm creating logos for Gravity Falls, Jimmy Neutron, and the Fairly Odd Parents. Starting with Gravity Falls, we have Dipper, who's the main character we're gonna go with first. He's a problem solver that's trying to uncover mysteries and solve puzzles, and he lives in a shack or lodge in the middle of the forest. So with that background in mind, I wanted to have a typeface that was more textured and had like a wooden type of feel or something like splintery. He as a character is very like kind of doubtful, not confident, but he's still like kind of strong. So I didn't want to go with a really bold, thick, and structured typeface because that would be too confident, but I also didn't want to go with a really weak and thin typeface because again, that wouldn't really match him as a character. Then I took his iconic tree logo from his hat and I put that in the tittle or the dot of the eye just because I thought that was a great way to make the logo more personalized besides just writing his name. I then made the background blue and that was pretty much it. Mabel was a bit difficult because I really could have gone in any direction with any of the fonts I picked because they all pretty much fit her weird quirky vibe. But the main thing I wanted to accomplish was to get her font to act more as like a really thicker, cozy overlaying like sweater because that's what she wears. So lots of folds, a thicker font. Again, this kind of like cozy vibe I think fits her quirkiness. So that was the main direction that I started off in. And it's why I went down to 2 different fonts, which I actually ended up switching last minute. I originally went with this font, but because last minute I thought it was more cartoony and playful, I ended up switching it when adding the color and adding the character. Soos was next, and kind of similar to other cartoons, he was kind of the dumb one. So to reflect that, I chose a bigger, bolder, thick typeface so it like made him stand out like he is as a character visually, but then he also stands out mentally because he's not the brightest. Unlike Billy from Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, Soos is a bit more smooth and like connected, so I wanted to make the font actually physically connect because Billy's just an idiot. But again, I wanted Soos to overall be kind of not smart, but still relatively put together. Wendy, not gonna lie, I completely forgot her as a character and her vibe, but I do remember that she was super chill and super laid back. Like her whole thing was like, whatever happens, happens. So for her design, I went with an old-fashioned kind of handwritten typeface just because honestly, this is how I think she would just write her name. I warped it and arced the text just a bit more to, again, give it more of a handwritten feel so it's not perfectly flat at the baseline. It's actually kind of like skewed and written with like the unevenness of a hand. And then because she's ginger, I changed it to orange and that was it. And lastly, we have Grunkle Stan, which I actually just misspelled his name the whole time I designed this. So that kind of shows how big of a fan I am. But I originally gravitated towards this font, and then I realized this was Dipper's font, so I had to get rid of that because I just couldn't have 2 of the same logos. But the main element I wanted to make sure to include was Stan's hat, because before even watching the show, I personally was like, what is this logo? What is this hat? Like, I saw him as a character and it was still mysterious. And being mysterious is actually a big part of his character. If you know the show, I'm not gonna say anything, but it's kind of important. I pretty much just had to figure out where the hat would go in relation to his name and or which letter in his name it would replace. And then to give more of an off-putting, not everything is what it seems vibe, I actually right-aligned the text so it seemed like, why is it like that? Normally if it was left aligned, you'd probably just assume like, oh, his name is so long that Stan goes under Grunkle. But having it be right aligned, I thought it would be really cool to be like, no, that's a purposeful choice and it's actually there for a reason because there is some mystery involved. Now, moving on to Jimmy Neutron. Holy shit, this took way longer than I anticipated, mostly because I wanted the logo to be either made of metal or like 3D rendered. And I couldn't really get it to work based on my current knowledge of like everything I knew 2-dimensionally. So I looked up tutorials and looked at different gradients of metals and I tried different variations of this silver, but even with a stroke, it didn't really look like real metal. So then I went the 3D route and I actually used the 3D extrude function in Illustrator, but this created more problems than solutions and it just wasn't giving boy genius. So I thought it would be cool to combine the atom symbol because science, and also it's like a focal point in Jimmy Neutron whenever he has and I thought to take that atom logo and put that on the tittle or the dot of the eye. Now, trying to make all these components work was an absolute nightmare because I wanted to have the atom be where the dot of the eye was. So I had the protons, neutrons, electrons, those like that pattern, they all overlapped each other and overlapped the letters J-I-M. And I also wanted a metal gradient, so I had to apply that through the letters. And on top of that, I wanted to figure out how to get it to be like 3D extruded, but also having the atom overlapping subtract through the letters. So in the end, it basically looked way too forced, and again, I had a bunch of iterations of it. It didn't look great, so I took a step back, looked at the name again, and I went, wait a minute, there's just a perfect space empty in the counter of the O. That's a perfect place to put the Atom logo without it being too complex. So that's exactly what I did. I duplicated the Atom logo, put it on top of itself, expanded its path so there would be enough space cut out of the letters for the actual logo to stand on. Then I subtracted that with the shape builder tool from the letters of the R and the N, put the Atom logo back on top, and there we go, finally. Yeah, that took a really long time. Carl was low-key a dark horse when being difficult to actually design for, mostly because every single idea I tried didn't stick. I knew I wanted his name to just be overall boring and plain and just there, because him as a character is just there. I first started with just changing different colors of the text to his shirt, maybe his pants, his overalls. Then I thought it would be cool to take the arm of the R, because it's the same shape as his hair actually, and then I would put that on the C to kind of reflect that. However, this just looked like a wild ass ligature, so that went out the window so quick. I tried glasses, shoe shape, overalls, pretty much every single iconic element or anything that makes Carl unique as a component to add, and nothing worked. So I went back to square one where I just wrote his name and I changed the colors to his alternating striped shirt, and yeah, that is what ended up working really well, actually. I'm gonna be honest, I had zero clue on what Sheen was gonna do or like any ideas around him, because all this character does is talk about his Ultra Lord.
This is Ultra Lord!
But if you're actually a fan of Jimmy Neutron, you would know that after the show ended up canceling or something, they made a spin-off series of Sheen alone, and it was called Planet Sheen. This was the image I found, and this was also the aesthetic that they went, because he was quite literally on a different planet. But I wanted it to be actually made out of like particles to really emphasize this is space. So from doing some research online, I actually found you can make random particles as an effect inside Illustrator. All you have to do is take the shape you want to be the pattern, so I did a circle in this case, added it as a scatter brush, and then literally just messed around with the settings on the shape that I wanted the particle to be on. And to get a good glow, I pasted like 5 different copies of the name on top of itself with different blending modes, just regular and overlay, and then added a outer glow and an inner glow on, I think, alternating layers with a green and a teal. Then after I did this to the letter S, I pretty much rinse and repeat for H, E, and N, and that was it. Cindy was easily the quickest one to do because I pretty much already knew I was going to use a script or a cursive-based font because it kind of fit her girly girl vibe. But Cindy is obviously not a perfect character. She's just a hater. I'm not even kidding. She literally just hates on Jimmy the entire show. So to be more, like, have more depth in her logo, I added a gradient of her yellow to green from her actual outfit, just to give it some more direct comparison to her as a character, but then also be a bit more, like, off-putting, because, again, she's not the, like, Mabel super cheery, upbeat, feminine character. She's literally the anti-character. Holy shit. Goddard? Okay, 2 things. 1, if you didn't know that's how the dog's name's spelled, I just learned that too. And second, this took by far the hardest logo to make, and I don't even know if it was worth it. Off the bat, I had great like dog tag army type of fonts that I knew I wanted his name to be in. But for the background, I also wanted it to be like the metallic pattern, showing like what Goddard is actually made out of. Like literally him as a robot, I wanted to be kind of in the background. However, once I got that idea, I thought it would be really cool and very ambitious to make that 3D. The reason that's so complicated is because I couldn't just make a 3D render with like a shape. I needed to make a 3D render of a pattern, and I couldn't just drag certain points from the pattern into this 3D skew because it wouldn't drag all the points, yada yada yada. It's super complicated, whatever. So that meant I couldn't generate using the 3D extrude tool like I did for Jimmy Neutron's name, and I also didn't want to make the jump to Photoshop because I wanted everything to be in Illustrator, 1 for simplicity and 2 for cohesiveness. So this is me figuring out the perspective tool in Illustrator, which I still don't know how to use. For some reason, it's way more complicated than you would think, and it took absolutely forever for it to just look trash, and not once did it look trash, twice. So I again did some research, and I found out you can actually use certain designs as symbols and map symbols onto a 3D object. So I tried that, which didn't go great because for some reason there were random weird blank render lines in between like every other square. So after an insane amount of overthinking, I realized it would make the most sense is if I added this as a symbol without the lines, and I just did it with the background gray with all the circle like bolts and the name. Map that on the 3D object like I was normally doing. But this time I would draw a shape behind it, so then the invisible random render lines would go away. And then I would draw in manually the vertical and horizontal lines of where the tiles would like go, if that makes sense. So then they would be lined up with the bolts, but then also lined up to an older version of the 3D render I made. Then I slapped the freaking name on top, and I'm gonna be honest, this is the best iteration because I didn't try anything else. This took so long, I didn't even test out any other font. Moving on to the last cartoon, Fairly Odd Parents. Timmy was, again, a really fast and easy font to design for because out of all the fonts that I chose beforehand, they all sucked. I literally chose fonts of like how a stereotypical Timmy would write their name Timmy. Like, I don't know why I went the handwritten route, but I did choose one really cartoony font that really fit the vibe of Fairly Odd Parents, I think. But if you didn't know Timmy as a character design, for some reason on the back of his hat, he has like a little floating dot. I wanted to replicate that floating element, so I added, even though it was all caps, I added a circle on top of the eye to give it a tittle. So the whole name was in caps, but there was just that small eye reflecting the floating hat thing from his hat. Then lastly, I just took his name and colored it that like pink purplish color that he has as a shirt, and then it had the tittle for the eye be that dark blue. I had the perfect font for Cosmo. I don't know how I found it, but it matched his really super like silly, not serious humor. And then because both Cosmo and Wanda are like fairies and they have crowns, I wanted to make sure that that element was duplicated in both their logos, regardless of how they looked. But they were both equally simple. I just went and for, again, Cosmo, I just made it green, chose that font, which I think turned out really well. And then for Wanda, it was a bit more difficult because she's really friendly and really helpful. And I wanted to convey that in the text, obviously, but there was like 3 different fonts I think that kind of worked. So I ended up going with one, I think that was italicized, but it was too thick of a font. And then when I went up to the top, of course, there was no other regular light or whatever weight of the font family. So I ended up manually making a lighter version of this bold font by adding a stroke on the inside, expanding, and then shape builder tooling it to subtract. And so then the font was actually thinner than what I originally started with. Now this may be a stretch, but I did change the kerning on Wanda's name and I think a bit on Cosmo's name, because since they are the fairies to Timmy, they are close to him. Like, they're like his best friends. They follow him around everywhere. They're close. So I wanted to make that replicated within the font. All the letters are close together, really close proximity to subconsciously kind of reflect like these are really important characters to the main character. And finally, we have Vicky, which I originally thought of going into her logo design with like a really stereotypical, spiky, scary font. And I picked 3, which I think looked pretty good until I looked at Vicky's hair. And if you notice, by some string of luck, her hair makes a V. And so I thought it'd be really cool to base the font off her actual like character design. So I took her hair design, took that as the V, and then for the eye, I also took the outline of her body and made that as the base of the eye. And then pretty much took the start of the font I was originally gonna use, but then played around and customized the C, the K, and the Y. So they all like looked cohesive and it wasn't a random V, I, and then Icky was an actual font. Then the last step was to angle everything because it did look kind of weird. It looked okay when it was straight on, but after trying it angled, it looked kind of explosive almost, which again gives more of the chaotic kind of crazy behavior that Vicky has. Again, she's a redhead, so I made the font orange, and that was Vicky's logo. Again, that looked way better. Like, I actually kind of designed that from the ground up. And finally, we now have all of the cartoon character logos across all 3 shows, Gravity Falls, Jimmy Neutron, and the Fairly Odd Parents. This project, no shock, like last time, was super fun. Time on this took, I think, around 11-12 hours total, so a little bit longer than the first version. Thank you guys so much for watching. That's going to be it for this video. Please make sure to subscribe. We're almost at 4,000 subscribers if I'm rounding up and being really helpful. So please subscribe if you did enjoy this video. Let me know in the comments which logo was your favorite or what other cartoons you would want to see me do logos for. And I'll see you guys in my next video.